When my son told me I was too embarrassing to sit at his wedding table, I smiled, nodded, and walked straight to my car. One phone call later, I had canceled the $47,000 venue payment. But that was just the beginning of what I had planned. By the time his wedding day arrived, he would learn exactly what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. We share new stories every day. And tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. I should have seen it coming when Marcus started dating Victoria 3 years ago. The subtle changes in his vocabulary, the way he became embarrassed by our family traditions, the gradual distance from everything that had shaped him into the man he was. But love makes you blind to red flags, doesn't it? Even a mother's love, the little corrections, the skipped Sunday dinners. The way Victoria's eyes skimmed my home like it was beneath her, I ignored them all. Until that Tuesday afternoon. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon as I rolled out his favorite apple pie. When Marcus sat in the chair where I'd once helped him with homework and said the words that changed everything. "Mom, we need to talk about the seating arrangements. Victoria's family has some concerns about the head table," he continued, his voice getting smaller with each word. "They think it might be better if you sat with Aunt Sarah instead." I stopped rolling the wooden pin frozen in my hands. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with 32 years of mother-son history that was apparently about to be rewritten. "What kind of concerns, Marcus?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his engagement ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. The same window I'd watched him play in the backyard through. The same kitchen where I'd celebrated every milestone of his life. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was dismantling our relationship in the very room where I'd built it. Well, do you know how Victoria's parents are? Her father went to Yale, graduated summa cum laude. Her mother speaks 3 languages fluently and sits on the board of the Metropolitan Opera. They're used to a certain level of sophistication at family events. The words hit me like ice water, each syllable carefully chosen to wound. "And I'm not sophisticated enough for their daughter's wedding." "It's not that, Mom. It's just ... He ran his hands through his hair. A nervous habit he'd had since childhood, one that used to make me want to smooth down his cowlicks and kiss his forehead. Now it just made me angry. "You still talk about Dad's plumbing business like it was some kind of empire. You tell those embarrassing stories about my childhood to anyone who will listen. And honestly, the way you dress, the things you say, Victoria's worried you might make the wrong impression on our extended family." I set down my rolling pin carefully, my hand surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Suddenly, the kitchen shrank around me. The curtains I'd sewn looked cheap. The floor whispered my inadequacy with every scar. Every place where my modest life had left its humble signature. "So, you want me to sit in the back, like a second-class citizen at my own son's wedding?" "Not the back," he said quickly, panic creeping into his voice as he realized how his words sounded. "Just not at the head table. Aunt Sarah's table will be lovely. You'll have a great view of everything. You'll be with people you're comfortable with. A great view of my humiliation, more accurately." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing my child's face. When had he become someone who cared more about impressing his in-laws than honoring his mother? When had the boy who used to proudly show off my homemade Halloween costumes to his friends become a man who was ashamed of the woman who'd made them? "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice carrying 32 years of love and disappointment, "who paid for this wedding?" His face flushed red, then pale, then red again. "Mom, that's not the point." "No, I think that's exactly the point. Who paid the $47,000 deposit for the Riverside Manor venue? Who's covering the $15,000 catering bill? The $8,000 for flowers, the $12,000 for photography, the $3,000 for the string quartet, the $2,500 for the wedding cake?" Each number hit him like a physical blow. I'd kept meticulous records. Every receipt filed away in the folder marked Marcus's wedding that sat on my kitchen counter. $89,000 and counting, more money than I'd spent on anything since buying this house 30 years ago. More money than most people made in 2 years. Handed over without question because I wanted my son to have the wedding of his dreams. You said you wanted to do this for us, he whispered. Unable to meet my eyes, I said I wanted to give my son the wedding of his dreams. I didn't realize that dream included hiding his mother like a dirty secret. The apple pie sat abandoned on the counter. Half-rolled dough already starting to dry out. 40 years of tradition reduced to waste because my son was too embarrassed to acknowledge where he came from. Too ashamed of the hands that had fed, clothed, and loved him into the man he'd become. What do you want me to do, Mom? Tell Victoria's family that my feelings matter more than keeping the peace. That my mother's wounded pride is worth ruining everyone's good time. And there it was. The truth he'd been dancing around for 20 minutes. His feelings didn't matter more than keeping the peace. My feelings didn't matter at all. I was just an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved. A source of potential embarrassment to be hidden away where the important people wouldn't have to acknowledge my existence. I untied my apron slowly, methodically buying time to process the magnitude of what was happening. My son, my only child, the person I devoted my entire adult life to nurturing and supporting, had just told me I wasn't good enough to sit at his wedding table. The woman who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through college, who never missed a single game, suddenly wasn't sophisticated enough for his new family? Get out, I said quietly. Mom, come on. Don't be dramatic about this. Get out of my house, Marcus. Right now, he stood up reluctantly, confusion replacing the guilt on his face. We can talk about this tomorrow when you've had time to cool down and think rationally about what's best for everyone. Tomorrow, you can explain to Victoria and her sophisticated family why they need to find a new venue, and a new caterer, and new flowers, and a new photographer. My voice stayed level, controlled, even as my heart was shattering into pieces. Because I won't be paying for a wedding where I'm not welcome. His face went white as the implications hit him. You can't be serious, deadly serious. You have exactly 24 hours before I cancel everything, Mom, please. You're being unreasonable. Think about what you're doing. I walked to the front door and held it open, letting the October air rush into my warm kitchen. Unreasonable would be continuing to fund my own humiliation. This is just business. After Marcus left, I sat in my empty kitchen for a long time, staring at the half-finished pie and listening to the silence. The house felt hollow without the sound of his laughter, without the warmth of believing I was valued by the person I'd sacrificed everything for. But for the first time in 3 years, the silence also felt clean. I walked to my desk in the corner of the living room and pulled out the manila folder I'd been carefully maintaining for the past 18 months. Bank statements, contracts, receipts, and carefully planned details for a celebration that was supposed to honor the joining of 2 families. Instead, it had become a monument to my own naivety. The numbers were even worse than I'd remembered. The venue deposit, $47,000. Catering. For 200 guests, $15,000. Flowers. For the ceremony and reception, $8,000. Photography and videography package, $12,000. String. Quartet for the ceremony, $3,000. Wedding. Cake from the exclusive bakery Victoria had insisted upon. Lantian Wubai. Transportation. For the bridal party, $1,500. But those were just the big expenses. There were dozens of smaller ones that had added up over the months. Victoria's bridal shower at the country club, $800. Her bachelorette party weekend in Napa Valley, $2,200. The engagement party at the yacht club, $3,500. Dress alterations for the bridesmaids, $600. Wedding favors from Tiffany & Co., $1,200. Every expense had been presented as essential. Non-negotiable, the bare minimum required to avoid social embarrassment. And like a fool, I'd paid for it all, emptying my savings account and taking out a second mortgage on my home to fund their ferry. Kale, $95,300. The final total made my stomach turn. Nearly $100,000 to celebrate the marriage of two people, one of whom was too embarrassed to seat his mother at the family table. I reached for my phone and scrolled to the contact I've been dreading to use. My finger hovered over the number for a moment, then pressed call before I could lose my nerve. Riverside Manor Events. This is Jennifer speaking. How may I help you? Jennifer, this is Emma Mitchell. I need to cancel the wedding reservation for March 15th. There was a pause, the sound of typing in the background. Mrs. Mitchell, let me pull up your file. Yes, I see the reservation here. That's quite short notice for a cancellation, according to our contract. Cancellations within 30 days of the event forfeit the entire deposit. I understand completely. Please proceed with the cancellation. Ma'am, that's a $47,000 deposit. Are you absolutely certain about this decision? I looked around my modest living room at the life I'd built from nothing after my husband died 12 years ago. The same living room where I'd worked 3 jobs to put Marcus through college, where I'd celebrated his graduation, where I'd cried tears of joy when he'd announced his engagement. The same living room where he'd just told me I was too embarrassing for his new life. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'll process the cancellation immediately. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Actually, yes. Could you please email me a confirmation of the cancellation? I'd like to have it in writing, of course. You should receive that within the hour. I hung up and sat in the sudden quiet of my house. Outside, October darkness was settling over the neighborhood. But inside, something that felt remarkably like peace was filling the space where anxiety used to live. My phone buzzed with a text message. Probably Marcus wanting to apologize or negotiate. I didn't check it. Instead, I poured myself a glass of the good wine, the bottle I'd been saving for his wedding toasts, and raised it to the empty room. 2 standards, I said aloud. And to the courage to maintain them, 24 hours later, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. sharp. Marcus's ringtone, the same silly song I'd assigned him when he was 16 and thought he was too cool for his mother. I let it go to voicemail, along with the next 6 calls that followed in rapid succession by 8 a.m. The texts had started. Mom, please pick up. We need to talk. This is insane. You can't just cancel everything over a seating arrangement. Victoria's parents are asking questions. Can't answer, please. I'm begging you. Just call me back. I deleted each message without responding and went about my morning routine. Coffee, toast, the crossword puzzle from yesterday's paper that I'd never had time to finish. For the first time in months, my schedule was my own. No wedding vendors to coordinate with, no crisis to solve, no impossible demands from Victoria to somehow fulfill on my working-class budget. By noon, Victoria had joined the campaign. Her contact photo filled my screen, all blonde highlights and practiced smile. The same photo she used for her social media profiles where she posted carefully curated images of their perfect life. I declined that call too. And the 15 that came after it. The voicemails painted a picture of escalating panic that was almost satisfying to witness. Marcus's voice growing more desperate with each message. Mom, please pick up. We can work this out. I was wrong to ask you to move tables. You can sit wherever you want. Then anger. You're ruining everything over a stupid misunderstanding. Do you have any idea what you've done? Then bargaining. Fine. You can sit at the head table. Right next to me. Is that what you want? Please just call the venue back. Then desperation. Mom, Victoria's crying. Her parents think we're irresponsible. They're talking about not coming to the wedding at all. Please, I'm begging you. But it was too late for negotiations. The damage was done, and more importantly, my eyes were finally open to the dynamic that had been slowly poisoning our relationship for 3 years. I spent the afternoon doing something I hadn't done in years, thinking about what I actually wanted for my life. Not what Marcus needed from me, not what would make Victoria happy, not what would impress her sophisticated family. What did Emma Mitchell want for herself? The answer surprised me with its simplicity. I wanted to matter. I wanted to be valued for who I was, not hidden away like an embarrassment. I wanted relationships built on respect, not financial dependence. I wanted to stop being taken for granted by people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient source of funding for their lifestyle. My sister Sarah called that evening, her voice tight with concern. "Emma, what's going on?" "Marcus called me 3 times today, crying and saying you'd completely lost your mind." I found it. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded, "I found my self-respect. He said you canceled the wedding venue. Over seating arrangements. I canceled my financial contribution to an event where I wasn't wanted." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You want to talk about it?" "Really talk, not just the surface version." So I told her everything. The years of gradual alienation as Marcus tried to remake himself into someone worthy of Victoria's family. The slow erosion of my place in his life as he became embarrassed by his working-class roots. The mounting financial pressure as I funded a lifestyle I could barely afford, hoping that my generosity would somehow buy me back my son's affection. The final insult of being deemed too embarrassing for his wedding table by the time I finished. We were both crying. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said finally. "It took courage to do what you did." "It took heartbreak," I corrected. Courage was just what was left over. The next morning brought a pounding on my front door at 7 a.m. Not knocking, but pounding. The kind of aggressive hammering that rattled the frame and announced pure desperation. Through the peephole, I could see Marcus standing on my small porch, his hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. Behind him, Victoria waited in their car, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery. Budget.I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Mom, please. We've lost everything." His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice hoarse from what I assumed was a night of arguing with Victoria and her family. The venue, the caterer, the florist, they all want full payment up front. Now that we don't have the deposit, the wedding is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks and we have nothing. "You have each other," I said quietly. "Isn't that supposed to be enough?" "Don't be naive, Mom. This isn't some romantic comedy where love conquers all. Do you know what Victoria's parents will think? What her friends will say? We'll be the laughingstock of her entire social circle." And there it was again. The real priority. Not love, not family, not the sacred bond of marriage. Social status and other people's opinions. "Marcus, do you love Victoria?" "Of course I do." "Why would you even ask that?" "Because if you loved her, you'd marry her in a courthouse with a $5 bouquet from the grocery store. If she loved you, she'd be happy with that too." His face crumpled. "It's not that simple, Mom. It's exactly that simple. Everything else is just performance art for people whose opinions shouldn't matter." Victoria finally emerged from the car, her designer heels clicking against my concrete walkway. Even in crisis, she was impeccably put together, every blonde hair in place. Her makeup flawless despite the early hour and the obvious stress of their situation. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, desperation leaking through the practiced tone. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. If my parents see this wedding collapse, they'll say I've ruined everything. They'll never forgive me. No misunderstanding, Victoria. I understand perfectly that I'm not good enough for your family's wedding. That's not what we said." She exchanged a look with Marcus, some silent communication passing between them that excluded me completely. "We never said you weren't good enough. You said I was too embarrassing to sit at the head table. You said your parents needed a certain level of sophistication that I couldn't provide. You wanted to hide me in the back with the other undesirables so your sophisticated friends wouldn't have to acknowledge my existence. What exactly am I misunderstanding?" Victoria's composure cracked slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in 3 years of knowing her. "Look, I know how that sounded, but you have to understand the pressure I'm under. My parents have very specific expectations about how a wedding should look, how a family should present itself. My friends, my social circle, they all have opinions about these things, and I don't fit that presentation. It's not personal, Mrs. Mitchell. It's just ... practical. I almost laughed. A mother being relegated to the back of her son's wedding isn't personal. We're willing to compromise, Marcus interjected quickly, panic making his voice rise an octave. You can sit wherever you want. Head table, your own table, anywhere you're comfortable. We just need you to call the vendors back. You're missing the point entirely, I said, looking between them and seeing two people who had learned all the wrong lessons about what marriage should be. This isn't about where I sit. This is about who I am to you. And you've made that very clear. Asterisk Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to what I supposed she thought was a persuasive tone. Mrs. Mitchell Emma, please. We can't have a wedding without a venue. Without catering. Without flowers? Everything we've planned for 2 years is falling apart. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to humiliate the person funding your dream wedding. We'll pay you back, Marcus said desperately. Every penny. I promise. We'll sign a contract, set up a payment plan, whatever you want. With what money, Marcus? Your salary from the marketing firm barely covers your apartment rent and Victoria's shopping habits. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. For 3 years, I'd been subsidizing their lifestyle, enabling them to live beyond their means, while they gradually excluded me from the life I was funding. The expensive restaurants where they entertained Victoria's friends, the weekend trips to wine country, the designer clothes that Victoria considered essential for maintaining her image. All of it had been made possible by a woman they were now too embarrassed to acknowledge at their wedding. So what do you want? Victoria's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating woman underneath. More money? A bigger role in the wedding. What's your price? The question stunned me into momentary silence. After everything that had happened, after all the hurt and humiliation and financial exploitation, she thought this was about money. She couldn't conceive of a world where someone might have principles that couldn't be bought, dignity that wasn't for sale. I want you both to leave, I said finally. And don't come back unless you're ready to apologize, not just to me, but to the memory of the woman who raised the man you claim to love. This is insane, Victoria snapped, her carefully modulated voice rising to something approaching a screech. You're destroying your son's happiness over a seating arrangement. Over nothing. I'm protecting what's left of my dignity from people who never valued it in the first place. I closed the door on their protests and turned, the deadbolt with a finality that felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. Through the window, I watched them argue in my driveway for another 10 minutes before driving away, their tires squealing against the asphalt in a display of frustration that would have embarrassed my working-class neighbors. But Victoria's parents probably wouldn't have found it undignified at all. The house felt different after they left. Not empty, but clean. Like a weight had been lifted from the air itself, allowing me to breathe fully for the first time in years. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at my kitchen table with the wedding folder that had consumed so much of my attention and resources for the past 18 months. Page after page of receipts, contracts, and carefully planned details for a celebration that would never happen. At least, not with my money. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. How are you holding up, sis? Better than expected, I typed back. For the first time in 3 years, I know exactly where I stand. The next few days brought a parade of intermediaries, all of them sent by Marcus and Victoria to convince me to reconsider. College friends who barely knew me, distant relatives I saw only at funerals. Even our old parish priest, all of them calling to tell me I needed to be the bigger person, to think about Marcus's happiness, to consider the impact of my decision on everyone else's lives. But nobody, not one single person asked about my happiness. Nobody wondered if being treated like an embarrassment might have hurt me. Nobody seemed to consider that maybe, just maybe, a son shouldn't have to choose between his mother and his fiancé's social status. It was Father Mackenzie who finally got through to me. not with guilt, but with understanding. "Emma," he said during his visit to my house on Thursday afternoon, "I've known you since Marcus was baptized. I've watched you sacrifice everything for that boy, work yourself to exhaustion to give him opportunities you never had. But sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices. Everyone thinks I'm being vindictive, Father, that I'm using money as a weapon. Are you?" I considered the question, honestly searching my heart for the truth. I don't think so. I think I'm finally learning that enabling bad behavior isn't the same thing as loving someone. That paying for my own humiliation isn't generosity, it's self-destruction. Father Mackenzie nodded slowly. "Then you're doing what you believe is right. That's all any of us can do." After he left, I made a decision that had been building in my mind for days. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd found online, surprising myself with my own boldness. "Good afternoon. This is Paradise Cove Wedding Chapel. How can I help you?" "I'd like to inquire about your elopement packages," I said, the words feeling strange but liberating as they left my mouth. "Certainly. Are you planning something intimate?" "Very intimate. Just the bride and groom if they're brave enough to choose love over spectacle." I spent the next hour learning about a small seaside chapel 2 hours north of the city, a place where couples could get married for less than $2,000, where the only decorations were God's creation, and the only requirement was a genuine commitment to each other. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since high school. I wrote a letter by hand. Not an email, not a text message, but an actual handwritten letter on my good stationery. The kind my mother had taught me to use for important occasions. "Dear Marcus, if you want to marry Victoria because you truly love her, because you can't imagine your life without her, because she makes you a better man, then I want to help you do that. I've made arrangements at Paradise Cove Wedding Chapel. Saturday, March 15th at 2 p.m. The same date you originally chose. The same commitment you wanted to make. Just without all the expensive theater. The total cost is $1,500, which I will gladly pay. Not because I approve of how you've treated me, but because I love you enough to help you build a marriage based on what actually matters. If Victoria agrees to this, if she's willing to marry you without the elaborate show and the impressive guest list, then I'll know your love is real. I'll know she values the man you are, not just the lifestyle you can provide or the social status you can offer. If she refuses, if she won't marry you without the $100,000 production, then you'll know something important about her priorities. And about yours. The choice is yours, son. It always has been. Love always. Mom, I sealed the envelope and drove to their apartment building, slipping it under their door like a message from a different life, a different version of their story, where love mattered more than appearances. 2 days passed in complete silence. No calls, no texts, no frantic visits. I began to wonder if my letter had somehow gotten lost, or if they were so angry they'd decided to cut me out of their lives entirely. Then on Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Marcus's name on the caller ID, the same silly ringtone I'd never had the heart to change. "Mom." "Hello, Marcus. I read your letter and—" A long pause filled with what sounded like traffic noise, like he was calling from outside somewhere. Victoria said no. She said she wouldn't be caught dead in some cheap chapel by the ocean, that her friends would never forgive her, that her parents would disown her if she married without their approval and their guest list. My heart broke for him all over again, even as relief flooded through me. "I'm sorry, son. Are you? Because part of me thinks this is what you wanted all along. For her to show her true colors, to prove that she doesn't really love me. I wanted her to love you enough to marry you, anywhere, under any circumstances. I wanted her to care more about being your wife than about throwing an impressive party. The fact that she doesn't isn't something I caused or wanted. It's just something that is—" Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Smaller, like the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, I think I've made a terrible mistake. Not just about the wedding seating, about everything. The way I've treated you, the things I've let Victoria say about our family, about Dad's memory. I've been so caught up in trying to fit into her world that I forgot about my own. I was crying now. 3 years of hurt and worry finally finding release. I've missed you so much, Marcus. Not the man you became for her, but the son I raised. The one who was proud of his father's work ethic and his mother's sacrifices. I've missed me too. Marcus ended his engagement 2 weeks later, returning Victoria's ring and moving out of their shared apartment into a smaller place he could afford on his own salary. The gossip in Victoria's social circle was probably spectacular. But he told me he'd stopped caring about their opinions the day he chose his mother over their approval. It wasn't easy at first. Trust, once broken, requires careful tending to grow back stronger than before. We had difficult conversations about boundaries, about respect, about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Marcus went to therapy to understand how he'd become someone who valued other people's approval more than his own family's well-being. But we did the work. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt what had been damaged. 6 months later, Marcus met Sarah, a kindergarten teacher at the elementary school near his new apartment. She wore thrift store dresses and cooked her own meals and thought my stories about his childhood were charming rather than embarrassing. She called me Mrs. Mitchell until I insisted she call me Emma. And she helped me plant tomatoes in my backyard garden while Marcus grilled burgers on the second-hand grill I'd finally been able to afford. When they got engaged 18 months later, Marcus asked me to help plan their wedding. Not to pay for it, they'd saved for that themselves, choosing a modest celebration that reflected their values rather than impressing anyone else. But to help choose the flowers from my garden, to recommend the photographer who'd captured his father's business events years ago, to share the family recipes that would become part of their catering menu. "Where should we seat you, Mom?" he asked during one of our planning sessions, his eyes twinkling with mischief and love. "Wherever you want your mother," I replied, "because that's all I've ever been, and all I've ever wanted to be." Their wedding was beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with money. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit by a seamstress from our old neighborhood, who charged a fraction of what Victoria's designers would have demanded. The flowers came from my garden and 3 others from women in our church congregation who wanted to contribute to the young couple's happiness. Marcus's college friends provided the music, playing guitars and singing songs that meant something to the bride and groom. The reception was held in our parish hall, decorated with lights strung by volunteers and tables covered with donated linens. I sat at the head table, right next to my son and his new wife, wearing a dress I'd bought for the occasion at a department store and feeling prouder than I'd ever felt in any fancy venue. During his speech, Marcus looked directly at me and said to my mother, who taught me that love isn't about impressing people, it's about showing up for each other, especially when it's hard. The applause was thunderous, but not as loud as the sound of my heart finally fully healing later. After the last dance had been danced and the last dish had been washed by volunteers who stayed to help clean up, Marcus walked me to my car in the church parking lot. "Mom, I never properly thanked you for what you did, for canceling that other wedding. You don't need to thank me for protecting both of us from a terrible mistake. But I do need to thank you, because you saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't have been able to live with. Someone who values appearances over love, money over character, social status over family." I hugged my son in that parking lot, under the stars and the glow of the church lights, and felt the completion of a circle that had been broken 3 years earlier in my kitchen. Not just forgiveness, but understanding. Not just reconciliation, but genuine growth on both our parts. You saved yourself, Marcus. I just stopped enabling you to do otherwise. As I drove home that night, past the houses where other families were building their own complicated stories of love and disappointment and redemption, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago. The woman who'd been willing to fund her own humiliation rather than risk losing her son's affection. The woman who'd confused financial generosity with love. Who'd enabled bad behavior in the name of family loyalty. That woman was gone. replaced by someone who understood that real love sometimes requires the courage to say no, to walk away, to let people face the consequences of choosing status over substance. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "My daughter, I'm Lau. Officially and joyfully. Thank you for raising the man I fell in love with. See you Sunday for dinner." Sunday dinners had become our tradition, a weekly gathering in my kitchen where Marcus and Sarah would tell me about their week while I cooked the recipes that connected us to the generations who came before us. Simple food, honest conversation, the kind of wealth that can't be bought or lost. But it doesn't impress anyone but nourishes everyone. The house felt full again, but in a different way than it had before. Full of respect rather than obligation, of genuine affection rather than financial dependence, of relationships built on choice rather than guilt or social pressure. I pulled into my driveway and looked at the home. It's cool I'd almost lost sight of in my desperation to fund someone else's dream wedding. The yellow curtains I'd sewn myself, the scratched linoleum that told the story of our real life. The kitchen table where love had been both broken and rebuilt. It wasn't sophisticated by Victoria's family standards. It wouldn't have impressed anyone who measured worth by bank accounts or social connections. But it was mine, and it was enough. And it was home to relationships that could survive the test of choosing substance over style. The venue payment I'd canceled had bought me something far more valuable than any wedding reception. It had bought me back my self-respect, my son's genuine affection, and a daughter-in-law who called me mom because she wanted to, not because financial obligation required it. If you enjoyed this story of standing up for yourself when it mattered most, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share in the comments below about a time when you had to choose between being respected and being used. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling behavior that's destroying your relationship with them. Your worth isn't determined by what you can do for others or how much you're willing to spend to buy their affection. It's determined by who you choose to be when the people you love try to make you smaller than you are. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the chance to choose love over status, character over convenience, and family over the fleeting approval of people who will never truly matter. And sometimes, just sometimes, canceling a wedding saves a marriage, the one between a mother and son who almost lost each other to the dangerous myth that love can be bought, rather than earned through mutual respect and genuine care. The most expensive lesson Marcus ever learned cost him nothing. It was the $95,000 lesson I refused to pay for that taught him everything he needed to know about what really matters in life. 3 years have passed since that devastating conversation in my kitchen, and I'm sitting in the same spot where it all began, but everything has changed. The yellow curtains have been replaced with white ones that Sarah helped me choose, letting in more light than this room has seen in decades. The scratched linoleum is gone too, replaced with warm hardwood floors that Marcus installed himself last summer, spending his weekends learning carpentry skills that would have horrified Victoria's family. More coffee, Grandma Emma. I look up to see little Michael, Sarah's nephew from her previous marriage, standing on his tiptoes to reach the coffee pot. At 7 years old, he's appointed himself as my official helper during our expanded Sunday dinners, and he takes the job seriously. "Just a splash, sweetheart," I tell him, watching as he carefully pours with the concentration of a surgeon. Sarah and Marcus have been trying to have children of their own for 2 years now, but in the meantime, they've opened their home and hearts to Michael. His father walked out when he was 3. The irony isn't lost on me. My son, who once was ashamed of his working-class mother, now proudly serves as a father figure to a boy whose own father couldn't handle responsibility. Tell Michael the story about Dad's first business job. Marcus calls from the living room, where he's assembling a bookshelf for Michael's bedroom. The same son who once cringed when I mentioned his father's plumbing business now requests these stories regularly, as if he's trying to reclaim the heritage he once rejected. Which story? I call back. The one where he accidentally flooded the mayor's basement, or the one where he saved Christmas by fixing the church's heating system on Christmas Eve. The Christmas one. Michael shouts, abandoning the coffee pot to run into the living room. I love that story. As I follow him, I pass the photo wall that Sarah created last year. It's a timeline of our family's real history, not the sanitized version Victoria would have approved of, but the messy, beautiful truth of who we are. There's my wedding photo with Robert, both of us young and broke and ridiculously happy. Pictures of Marcus as a baby, a toddler, a gap-toothed first grader. Robert in his work clothes, proud and tired after 16-hour days building the business that would eventually put Marcus through college. And there, in a place of honor, is a photo from Marcus and Sarah's wedding. Not the formal portraits, but a candid shot someone took during the reception. Marcus is laughing at something Sarah whispered in his ear, and I'm in the background, dancing with Father Mackenzie while Michael was just for then spins around our feet in pure joy. It's the kind of photo Victoria would have hated. Too real, too unpolished, too honest about who we actually are when we're not performing for anyone else. Tell us about Grandpa Robert and the Christmas miracle, Sarah says, settling onto the couch with her knitting. She's making a blanket for the baby they're hoping to adopt next year. Her fingers moving with the same patient rhythm my mother used when she taught me to sew. So I tell the story again, even though they've all heard it dozens of times. How Robert got the emergency call at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve, 1987, when the heating system at St. Mary's failed completely. How he spent all night in the freezing basement, with nothing but a flashlight in his toolbox, determined that the Christmas morning service wouldn't be canceled. How he emerged at dawn covered in grease and exhaustion, just in time to see the boiler roar back to life. And Father Mackenzie said it was a Christmas miracle. Michael chimes in, having memorized his favorite part. And Grandpa said it wasn't a miracle, just good old-fashioned plumbing. Everyone laughs, even though we've heard this punchline countless times. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're acts of reclamation. Ways of honoring the man whose memory Victoria's family had deemed embarrassing. My phone buzzes with a text message, and I'm surprised to see an unknown number. The message makes my breath catch. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Patricia, Victoria's cousin. I hope you remember me from the engagement party. I wanted you to know that Victoria and James are getting divorced. She found out he'd been embezzling from his family's trust fund to pay for their lifestyle. The FBI arrested him last week. I thought you should know that you saved Marcus from something terrible. I stare at the message for a long moment, processing the information. Victoria had married James Whitmore III within 6 months of her breakup with Marcus. A quick rebound that her family had celebrated as trading up. James had everything Marcus lacked: old money, social pedigree, connections that opened doors without effort. Apparently, he'd also had a gambling addiction and a complete lack of moral compass. What is it, Mom? Marcus notices my expression. You look like you've seen a ghost. I hand him my phone and watch his face change as he reads. Sarah looks over his shoulder, her knitting forgotten in her lap. Wow, Sarah says softly. Victoria dodged a bullet there. Victoria dodged a bullet. Marcus looks up from the phone, his expression complicated. Mom, you saved my life. If you hadn't forced me to see what Victoria really valued, I would have married her. And then what? Would I have gotten sucked into that world of keeping up appearances at any cost? Would I have become someone who cut corners and bent rules just to maintain a lifestyle I couldn't afford? I think about the man Marcus was becoming 3 years ago. So desperate for Victoria's family's approval that he was willing to hide his own mother. Would he have eventually compromised his integrity the way James had? Would the pressure to fit into their world have corrupted him completely? You saved yourself, I tell him, the same words I've repeated many times over the past 3 years. I just stopped enabling you to make the wrong choice. No, Mom, you did more than that. Marcus hands me back my phone and sits down beside me on the couch. You showed me what real love looks like. Real love doesn't ask you to be ashamed of where you came from. Real love doesn't require you to hide your family or change your values or pretend to be someone you're not. Sarah nods, reaching over to squeeze my hand. When Marcus first told me about what happened with the wedding, About how you canceled everything. I thought you were the bravest woman I'd ever heard of. Most mothers would have just swallowed the hurt and paid for the wedding anyway. Most mothers don't have the luxury of principles when their children's happiness is at stake, I reply. But sometimes protecting someone's happiness means protecting them from their own bad decisions. The conversation is interrupted by a knock at the door. Through the window, I can see a familiar figure on my porch. Dr. Elizabeth Harper. The family therapist Marcus has been seeing for the past 2 years. But she's not here in a professional capacity today. She's become a friend, someone who understands the complicated dynamics of families trying to heal from years of dysfunction. I hope I'm not interrupting, she says when I open the door. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see how everyone was doing. It's perfect timing. Sarah calls from the kitchen where she's started preparing dinner. We were just talking about second chances and the roads not taken. Dr. Harper settles into the chair that's become hers during these informal visits. Speaking of second chances, I have something I want to share with you all. I've been working with a family in a situation very similar to yours. Emma, a mother who is being financially exploited by her adult children while being emotionally marginalized. She used your story as inspiration to set boundaries with her own family. My story. Marcus shared it during one of our sessions, with your permission. How you chose self-respect over financial manipulation. How you forced your son to choose between genuine love and social climbing. It's become something of a teaching tool for me when I work with families dealing with similar issues. I'm quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. The idea that my painful experience might help other families navigate similar challenges is both humbling and oddly comforting. What happened with that family? Marcus asks. The mother stopped funding her children's lifestyle. 2 of her 3 adult children threw tantrums and cut off contact. But the youngest, a daughter, chose to rebuild their relationship on healthier terms. She's getting married next month to a man who insisted on meeting her mother before he proposed. Because he said any man who was ashamed of his future mother-in-law wasn't worthy of marrying her daughter. The parallel to my own story is clear, and I feel a surge of hope for a woman I've never met but whose journey mirrors my own. There's something else, Dr. Harper continues. That daughter asked me to give you a message. She wanted you to know that your courage gave her mother the strength to demand better treatment. She said to tell you that you probably saved multiple families when you canceled that wedding venue. The weight of that statement settles over me like a warm blanket. All the pain, all the doubt, all the lonely nights wondering if I'd destroyed my relationship with Marcus forever. It had led not just to our healing, but potentially to healing for strangers I'll never meet. I have a confession, Marcus says suddenly. I've been thinking about writing a book. About what happened to us, about how a canceled wedding saved our family. Dr. Harper thinks it could help other people who are struggling with similar issues. A book. I'm startled by the suggestion. About our private business. About the courage it takes to choose love over enablement. He corrects gently. About what real family loyalty looks like. About the difference between supporting someone and subsidizing their bad choices. Sarah looks up from the vegetables she's chopping. I think it's a beautiful idea. How many families are out there right now going through exactly what you went through? How many mothers are funding their own humiliation because they're afraid of losing their children's love? And how many adult children are making terrible choices because the people who love them most are too afraid to let them face consequences? Dr. Harper adds, Emma, you found a third option when it seemed like you only had 2 choices: enable Marcus's bad behavior or lose him completely. You chose to love him enough to risk losing him. I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, standing in my kitchen with flour-dusted hands, listening to my son tell me I wasn't good enough for his new life. That woman felt like she had to choose between funding her own humiliation or losing her child forever. She never imagined there might be a third option: loving him enough to force him to choose between his authentic self and his performative self. What would you call this book? I ask Marcus. He grins. The same mischievous smile he had as a little boy when he was planning some elaborate surprise. I was thinking the most expensive wedding that never happened, or maybe How I learned to stop buying love and start requiring respect. Those are terrible titles, Sarah says, laughing. What about something simpler? Like When Love Says No or The Gift of Disappointed Expectations. I like that second one, Dr. Harper says, because that's exactly what you gave Marcus, the gift of disappointed expectations. The chance to discover that his world wouldn't end if he couldn't impress Victoria's family, that his worth wasn't determined by their approval. As the afternoon fades into evening, more people arrive for our Sunday dinner. Aunt Sarah and her husband. It's two of Marcus's college friends who've become regular fixtures at our table. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, who always brings her famous tres leches cake. The dining room that once felt too small for Victoria's standards is now filled with a laughter and conversation of people who choose to be here, not people who feel obligated by guilt or financial dependence during dinner. The conversation turns to Michael's upcoming school play, where he's playing the lead role in a production about family traditions. Sarah has been helping him memorize his lines, and Marcus has been building the set on weekends. It's the kind of community involvement that Victoria would have found beneath her. But that has become the cornerstone of our rebuilt family life. Grandma Emma, Michael says during dessert, "Will you come to my play next Friday? I want everyone to see my whole family there." The casual way he includes me in his definition of family brings tears to my eyes. This little boy, who has no blood relationship to me whatsoever, claims me as his grandmother with the same easy affection Marcus once reserved for me. The circle of love that Victoria's family tried to narrow has expanded instead, encompassing not just Marcus and Sarah, but Michael, Dr. Harper, neighbors, friends, and strangers who've heard our story and found inspiration in it. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I tell him, front row center, cheering louder than anyone else in the audience. After everyone leaves and the dishes are washed and put away, I find myself back in my kitchen, the place where everything began and ended and began again. The room looks different now, brighter, warmer, more welcoming, but the essential character remains the same. This is still the kitchen where I made countless meals on a tight budget, where I celebrated Marcus's achievements and mourned his father's death. The difference is that now it's also the kitchen where love learned to say no, where boundaries were established, where self-respect was reclaimed. My phone rings, interrupting my contemplation. The caller ID shows a number I don't recognize, and I almost let it go to voicemail. But something makes me answer, Mrs. Mitchell. This is Jennifer from Riverside Manor Events. My blood runs cold. Jennifer is the woman I spoke to when I canceled Marcus's wedding 3 years ago. The woman who processed the cancellation that changed everything. "I hope you don't mind me calling," she continues. "I got your number from our old records. I wanted to tell you something that I think you'd want to know." "What is it?" "Do you remember Victoria Pemberton? She was supposed to have her wedding at our venue the same day you canceled your son's reservation." "I remember." "Well, she ended up booking with us anyway, about 6 months later, for her wedding to someone else. James Whitmore, I think his name was. Anyway, the wedding was, well, it was everything you'd expect from someone with unlimited resources and questionable taste. $1 easy. Maybe more." I wait, sensing there's more to this story. "The thing is, Mrs. Mitchell, I've been in this business for 15 years and I've seen a lot of weddings. Happy ones, sad ones, everything in between. But that wedding, Victoria's wedding, it was the most joyless celebration I've ever witnessed. The bride looked miserable, the groom looked drunk, and the families looked like they were attending a funeral instead of a wedding." Jennifer pauses, and I can hear papers shuffling in the background, "But I've also seen the photos from your son's actual wedding. The one at St. Mary's, Sarah posted them on social media and tagged our location by mistake. So they showed up in our feed, Mrs. Mitchell. I've never seen a happier bride and groom in my life. The joy was just radiating from everyone in those pictures." "Why are you telling me this?" I ask, though I think I know. "Because I wanted you to know that you made the right choice. Whatever pain you went through, whatever people said about you, you saved your son from a marriage that would have made him miserable. And you gave him the chance to find real happiness instead." After I hang up, I sit in my quiet kitchen and think about the paths not taken. The wedding that never was. The marriage that would have been a disaster. 3 years ago, I thought I was destroying my son's happiness when I canceled that venue reservation. I never imagined I was actually saving it. My laptop is open on the kitchen table and on impulse. I open a new document and begin typing. Chapter 1. The Day Love Learned to Say No When. My son told me I was too embarrassing to sit at his wedding table. I knew I had a choice to make. I could swallow my hurt and fund my own humiliation, or I could teach both of us a lesson about what real love actually looks like. I chose love. Real love. The kind that sometimes has to be cruel to be kind, that sometimes has to risk everything to save what matters most. I write for 2 hours. The words flowing like water from a broken dam. The story wants to be told, not just my story, but the story of every parent who's ever had to choose between enabling their child's bad choices or risking their relationship to protect their child's authentic self. The story of every family that's discovered that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just expensive emotional theater when I finally stop typing. I have the beginning of something that feels important. Not just a book, but a roadmap for other families navigating the treacherous territory between support and enablement, between love and manipulation. I save the document as the gift of disappointed expectations and close the laptop. Tomorrow, I'll call Marcus and tell him about Jennifer's phone call, about the book I've started writing, about the strange and wonderful ways that pain can transform into purpose. But tonight, I'm simply grateful. Grateful for the courage I found 3 years ago in this same kitchen. Grateful for the son who chose love over status. For the daughter-in-law who embraced our messy, imperfect family story. For the grandson who calls me family without any obligation to do so. Most of all, I'm grateful for the lesson that nearly destroyed us, but ultimately saved us. That the most loving thing you can do for someone isn't always the easiest thing. Sometimes love requires you to be the villain in someone else's story so they can eventually become the hero in their own. The $95,000 I refused to spend on a wedding that would have been a beautiful disaster was the best investment I never made. It bought my son a chance at real happiness. Our family a foundation built on respect instead of obligation. And me the knowledge that I'm strong enough to choose love over fear. Even when love looks like letting go. And sometimes, that's the most expensive lesson money can't buy. In the end, it wasn't about a chair at a wedding table. It was about self-respect, about drawing the line between love and humiliation. By saying no, she didn't just cancel a venue, she saved her dignity, her son's future. It proved that real family isn't measured by appearances, but by the courage to stand up for yourself. Have you ever had to choose between being respected and being accepted? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. If this story moved you, give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more powerful stories about justice, family, and self-worth.